Thank you for joining me on this video series examining the accuracy of missing 411 Eastern United States. Today we'll be looking at a section of the book that is dedicated to Michigan. There are just 8 cases in this section, 3 of which were cases after the year 2000, so if there have been any updates, I'll let you know. We are starting off with a case that's over 150 years old, however, and it is quite lengthy. I am referring to the case of Katie Flynn. Katie, who was 3 years old at the time, went missing in the summer of 1868 from Walhalla, Michigan. Katie's father ran a logging camp where Katie and her mother would come to live with him during the summer months. Katie was with her father riding one of the horses on a logging cart. She would ride the horse up the hill, dismount, then run back down the hill on an adjacent trail. She went missing on this trail on her way back down. Her mother thought that she was with her father, and vice versa. Later that day, however, when her father returned home from work, a search was launched. Her tracks on the hill merged with the tracks of a bear. At 4 p.m. the next day, Katie was found standing on a fallen tree that was acting like a bridge over a river. At the same time, searchers saw a huge bear jump into the river, then run away. Katie was scratched up, but otherwise unharmed. Katie was asked why she didn't try to escape from the bear earlier, and her story was reported in the Ludington Daily from April 24th, 1932. Quote, "Big dog came up to me, took me in his arms, and walked away with me." Close quote. She went on to say that the dog ate one of her shoes. The story was printed again in the Ludington Daily News on July 6th, 1961. Quote, "In answer to my questions, the child said that after her father had left, she played a little in the sand when a big black thing came along and played with her. Then it held out its paw and she caught hold of it and walked away with her. Just before dark, it had left her for a while, and when it came back, its paw was full of wintergreen berries. The bear ate some of the berries and she ate some. Then it scraped a big pile of leaves close to her own and lay down close to her, and during the night tried to cover her with its body." Close quote. Mr. Pilates takes the rather obvious opportunity to allude to Bigfoot. Quote, "I do not know what took Katie, but I do not believe it was a bear." Close quote. There's another story from the same time that references Henry Flynn, Katie's father, and it tells it a little differently. And there is another similar story from May 15th of 1888 of the New York Times, where Millard Davis disappeared and was found alive, claiming to be looked after by a bear. Let's review. The first thing that strikes me about this case is that the 2 sources that Pilates cites for this case are 64 and 93 years after the incident, respectively. Does that not raise some red flags as to the accuracy of these stories? I can only speculate, though, since I was unable to obtain those 2 issues of that publication. I was able to find references to it, though, as the papers refer to this story as the, quote, "oft retold story of Katie and the bear," close quote. Also, I was able to locate an article from 1868. First of all, the article I have states that she was 4, not 3. Perhaps more importantly, the father knew that Katie was there with him and told her to go home. Instead, she chose to play in the sand for a while in a pit that was just off of the trail. As for the wounds that were covering her, in addition to the scratches that were noted in Missing 411, she also had a bite on her back where the bear had bitten her clothes to carry her. And as if that didn't remove all doubt that it was indeed a bear, the article from 1941 indicates that the bear returned to the house many times and was eventually shot and killed by a hunter who Katie's father had hired. It would have been pretty obvious at this point if it had not been a bear. As for the story changing over time, it doesn't surprise me at all. This definitely descended into the realm of urban legend. The story was told for decades and probably has many versions. Again, we have a case that is intriguing on its own, but is tainted by Mr. Pilates' bias. He left out the articles that were published at the time of the incident and the information about the bite that she received, as well as the bear later being killed. It seems as though he spun this whole thing to support his Bigfoot agenda rather than any interest in promoting a case of a missing child, which this also isn't, considering that she was found. Up next is Raymond Mackey. Raymond, who was 17 at the time, went missing on November 27, 1936 from Mohawk, Michigan. He was last seen hunting with his dog near the Hibbard hunting camp near the Keweenaw Woods. A search was launched the same day when he did not return. 6 days into the search, Raymond's rifle was found. His mitten lining was found in a swamp a few hundred yards away from the rifle. His dog wandered into the search and rescue camp shortly thereafter. The search was called off after 2 weeks. Pilates notes that, given the evidence, it looks like Raymond is deceased. Let's review. The first point called into question is that, based on the information that I was able to find, the search lasted for 3 weeks, not 2 weeks, and was further set to resume in the spring after the weather had cleared. As for the last point, I finally agree with Pilates on something, especially since his body was found in the next spring when the search resumed. It was just 20 feet away from where bloodhounds lost the trail in the snow. Up next is Edward William Wolfe. Edward, who was 15 at the time, went missing on October 6, 1946 from Boulder Junction, Wisconsin. I actually have to do a double take here to make sure that I got the right state, considering this is supposed to be the chapter on Michigan. But moving on. Edward was last seen going wolf trapping or hunting. His parents felt he was headed near Whitney Lake. When he failed to return that night, a search was launched. Searchers found 6 of the 7 wolf traps that he had with him near the lake. On October 9th, 1946, an article in the Herald Times makes 2 strange claims. Footprints were found, not boot marks, but footprints. And secondly, it does not make sense that the bloodhounds, which were brought to the scene, did not follow these footprints that they found. On October 14th, the sheriff got involved and terminated all of the search and rescue. He stated that he believed that the teenager had gone to Alaska. There was no evidence supporting this, however. He was never found. Let's review. First, I'd like to note that I didn't find any articles that mentioned traps being found, but secondly, even if they were found, the presence of traps don't indicate when they were placed. Since he frequented that area, he could have placed them days or perhaps even a week before. I couldn't find the article in the Herald Times, however the Herald Telegram does make those claims. As for the so-called strange claims that the article makes, obviously a footprint can mean a shoe or boot print as well. It doesn't necessarily mean a bare footprint, which I imagine would actually be noted if it were indeed the case. It makes perfect sense that the bloodhounds did not follow these footprints, as bloodhounds follow scents. If the prints were old enough, or if these boot prints or footprints or whatever you want to call them did not even belong to Edward, then obviously they wouldn't follow them. As for there being no evidence for the sheriff's belief that he had gone to Alaska, there is evidence I shall quote from the article of the Portage Daily Register. Quote, Sheriff Peter Anderson said it had been learned that Wolfe had urged a 13-year-old boy to join him in a journey to Alaska. The conversation took place about a week before he was reported missing. Close quote. The article goes on to state that even his parents believed that he had gone to Alaska. Way to throw a fellow law enforcement officer under the bus like he didn't know what he was doing. The last point seems correct. All I could find was an article from Spokane, Washington, asking for people to look out for him, since his parents believed that he went to that area. Up next is Kenneth Scott. Kenneth, who was 4 years old at the time, went missing on September 28, 1958, from Norway Lake, Michigan. Kenneth was following his two brothers back to camp, but couldn't keep up with them. His brothers didn't wait for him, and when he didn't arrive at the camp, a search was immediately launched. The search involved more than 1,000 people and lasted for 5 days. A helicopter located Kenneth, deceased, on a hillside 15 miles from where he had gone missing. The coroner said that he died 3 days into being missing from exposure. David Pilates cites a book, Lost Person Behavior, and notes that 95% of the time, children of this age are found within a 4.1 mile radius of where they go missing. Let's review. A helicopter did indeed find the body of Kenneth, but it was not 15 miles away. He was found a mile or two from where he went missing. The only reference to 15 miles is this statement in The Morning News, which is a Delaware newspaper. Quote, it is believed that searchers had gone within 50 to 100 feet of where the body was found, but the police said that the boy may have covered up to 15 miles in his wandering in circles through the thick brush and woodland. Close quote. In the same article, it clearly states that the body was found about 2 miles from where he went missing. And would you look at that, now the case fits the behavior that is outlined in the book. Up next is Carol VanHoll. Carol, who was 3 years old at the time, went missing on June 28, 1959, from Dickinson County Picnic Ground, Michigan. The VanHoll family of 6 was at the picnic grounds for the afternoon when they realized that Carol was missing around dinner time. A search was launched for her within an hour of her disappearance, which included over 500 people, helicopters, and bloodhounds. 13 hours into the search, Carol was found asleep in a heavily wooded swamp, crying about 1 mile from where she went missing. She was on a mound in a swamp surrounded by water. David Pilates cites the Lost Person Behavior book again, saying that she far exceeded the 2 mile radius for her age group. So, yes, he says that 1 mile is more than twice 2 miles. The reason for this confusion seems to be the same as the last case. Police said that they believed that she had wandered about 5 miles. However, the book says that children in Carol's age group are normally found within a 2 mile radius from where they went missing, which is indeed the case here. The child in the previous case was found just 7 miles away 9 months prior. Mr. Pilates says that this is not a coincidence, as there are no children reported from that area in subsequent or prior years. This is indeed an odd case, and the information I found agrees with the information that's in Missing 411. It's just wild to me that Mr. Pilates manages to contradict himself, or otherwise misunderstand the difference between estimated distance traveled and distance from the point of going missing. To my understanding, the part of the reason why younger children are found in a tighter radius to where they go missing, in addition to lack of physical strength, is lack of attention span. That is to say, that younger children tend to change direction often, and end up going in circles or they zigzag rather than just going in one direction. This is in addition, as I said, to them just traveling more slowly in general. Anyway, let's move on to the next case. Joe Cluley. Joe, who was 73 at the time, went missing on July 13th, 2008 from Tahquamenon State Park, Michigan. He owned a log cabin that he referred to as the Chippewa Hunting Post on the north bank of the Tahquamenon River. Joe visited the cabin with his dog, Chip. This was the last time that he was seen. His car was found unlocked with his keys still inside of it by the trailhead to his cabin, which was about a 1-mile hike down a well-defined trail. The official search lasted just 4 days, but the volunteers continued on for many weeks later. Mr. Pilates makes a big deal of the official search ending so soon. Chip showed up at the cabin on August 1st, and he was approximately 20% lighter, but in generally good health. It did not appear as though he had been living in the woods for weeks. This case is in close proximity to the next case. In review, I want to point out that it is a little misleading to state that the official search only lasted for 4 days. The sheriff's department pulled out of the search, but there were still official search and rescue teams involved after that point. Additionally, the deputies and detectives continued to investigate leads. It sounds like they just couldn't spare the manpower to be physically out in the woods looking themselves. As for the dog returning in good health, is 20% underweight considered good health? Being underweight for animals is a lot more severe than it is for humans. The point being that they don't have a whole lot of weight to lose normally. So 20% underweight would generally be considered a quite dangerous health condition. However, for the last point, to Pilates' credit, for the first time I think I can finally call this, yes, actually close proximity. It's within 10 miles and it seems, though, about 4 years apart. Up next is Christopher Hallux. Chris, who is 30 years old, went missing on March 17th, 2004, near Paradise, Michigan. Chris was an avid outdoorsman and known to have survival skills. He was even known to stash food and supplies in the woods for emergencies. He was last seen buying soda and snacks from a convenience store and mentioned that he was going back to his camp. Eventually, he was reported missing, and the local search and rescue team found what they thought were Chris's snowshoe tracks and were able to track them for several miles. The tracks led to a heavily wooded swamp where they lost the trail. Chris was never found, but several of his little caches in the woods were. I couldn't find any information that directly contradicts what's in the book. This, however, in my opinion, is not a strange case. Chris was known to spend many days out in the wilderness by himself. In reality, this is something that was probably going to happen at some point or another. The final case in this section is Derek Ray Hennigan. Derek, who was 35 at the time, went missing on August 4th, 2008 from Newberry, Michigan. He had made plans to meet his girlfriend in a deer blind at 4:30 p.m., but he didn't show up. He was last seen crossing the street and heading into the woods. He was never found. Let's review. The time frame is a little off. He was last seen crossing the street at 4:30, and he had made plans to meet his girlfriend even after that. He had been fighting with his girlfriend and was living with a neighbor at the time. He had called several people in the days before his disappearance asking for a ride to Hartford. The second point, however, is correct. That time at 4:30 when he was seen crossing the street is indeed the last time that he was seen. He was indeed never found, and in 2012 he was declared legally dead, and this case was made a homicide by investigators. Thank you for joining me on this examination of Missing 411 Eastern United States. Next week we are going to cover 2 states, Iowa and Illinois. Until then, take care.